The fisherman spotted a metal box floating where nothing should have been. When he finally pried it open on shore, what spilled out made his blood run cold. What he did next saved lives no one knew were in danger. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning broke pale and quiet over Lake Mirren, a vast body of water nestled between pine-covered mountains in northern Oregon. Mist clung to the surface like breath, and the air carried the sharp bite of early autumn. The water was dark, almost black in the pre-dawn hours, reflecting nothing but the gray sky above. For most people, Lake Mirren was a place for summer cabins and weekend fishing trips. But for Marcus Webb, it was everything. It was home, livelihood, and the only companion he needed besides his faithful dog. Marcus had been fishing these waters for nearly 20 years. He knew every inlet, every submerged log, every drop-off where the trout liked to gather in the cooler months. He was a man in his early 50s, weathered by sun and wind, with calloused hands that had pulled thousands of nets and lines from the cold water. His face was lined, not with bitterness, but with the quiet acceptance of someone who had chosen simplicity over comfort. Years ago, he had walked away from a failing marriage, a job that suffocated him in Seattle, and a city that felt like a cage. Out here, on the lake, he found something he had never known before: peace. His boat was small, just a 14-foot aluminum skiff with a sputtering outboard motor that he maintained himself. The hull was dented and scratched from years of use. The paint faded to a dull gray that blended with the water. It wasn't much to look at, but it was reliable, and that was all that mattered. Every morning before sunrise, Marcus would push off from the narrow dock behind his cabin, the wood slick with dew, and motor out to his usual spots. The routine had become sacred to him, a meditation that required no words, only the rhythm of waves and the pull of the line. Sometimes he fished for bass, other times for trout or pike. Whatever the lake offered, he took gratefully, selling what he could at the small market in Thornhill, the nearest town 15 miles south, and keeping the rest for himself. His needs were simple: a roof that didn't leak, a fire that burned warm, and enough food to get him through the winter. Everything else was excess. This particular morning felt different, though Marcus couldn't say why. The air was heavier than usual, the silence deeper. Even the birds, which normally called from the trees along the shore, were absent. The forest that surrounded Lake Mirren seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Marcus scanned the water as he guided his boat toward the northern cove, a sheltered spot where the fish often gathered beneath overhanging branches. His breath misted in the cold, and he pulled his wool jacket tighter around his shoulders, the fabric rough against his neck. His dog, Sailor, a black and white border collie with intelligent eyes and a perpetually wagging tail, had stayed behind at the cabin this morning. The dog usually came along, perched at the bow like a figurehead, but today Sailor had been restless, pacing the dock and whining. Marcus had left him behind, trusting the dog's instincts even if he didn't understand them. The water was glassy, undisturbed except for the wake of his boat. Marcus cut the motor about 100 yards from the cove, letting the skiff drift silently. He reached for his fishing rod, preparing to cast his line, when something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a piece of driftwood, something dark bobbing in the water about 50 yards to his left. But as he drew closer, the shape became clearer. It was too angular, too deliberate to be natural. The morning mist shifted, and Marcus could make out its details more clearly now. It was a box, a metal box, sealed tight, about the size of a large tackle box or small cooler. Its surface was dark green, military style, with heavy latches on the front and a rusted handle on top. Waterlogged weeds clung to its sides, and it rocked gently with the motion of the lake, sitting low in the water as if weighted down by whatever was inside. Marcus's pulse quickened. In all his years on the water, he had never seen anything like this. The lake wasn't a dumping ground. People didn't just toss sealed containers into the water, especially not ones that looked deliberately concealed. He started the motor again, maneuvering the boat alongside the floating object. The closer he got, the more details emerged. The metal was corroded in places, suggesting it had been in the water for some time, but the seals still looked intact. He cut the engine and let the boat drift the final few feet. Leaning over the side, Marcus reached for the handle. The box was heavier than he expected, waterlogged and dense, as if packed tight with something substantial. He grunted with effort as he hauled it over the gunwale, water streaming from its seams and pooling on the floor of the boat. It landed with a heavy thud that made the whole skiff rock. For a long moment, Marcus just stared at it. The latches were corroded but still intact, locked firmly in place. There were no markings, no labels, nothing to indicate where it had come from or who it belonged to. He crouched down, running his fingers along the edges. The metal was cold and slick, and he could feel the weight of whatever was inside shifting slightly when he tilted it. It made a muffled sound, not quite liquid, not quite solid. A part of him wanted to open it right there, to satisfy the curiosity that burned in his chest. But something made him hesitate. The lake stretched wide and empty around him, the mist still clinging low to the surface. The silence felt oppressive now, unnatural, as if the world were holding its breath and watching to see what he would do. He glanced around, half expecting to see another boat, someone observing from the shore. But there was nothing. Just water, trees, and the endless gray sky. Marcus made a decision. He fired up the motor and turned the boat back toward shore, the sealed box sitting ominously at his feet. His cabin wasn't far, just a 10-minute ride along the eastern shoreline, tucked into a small cove where the trees grew thick and close to the water. He would open it there, on solid ground, where he could think clearly and where he had access to tools if the latches proved stubborn. The journey back felt longer than usual. His eyes kept drifting down to the box, his mind racing with possibilities. Contraband? Stolen goods? Some kind of elaborate prank left by bored teenagers? None of it made sense. Lake Mirren was remote, accessible only by a single winding road that most people avoided. The nearest highway was 30 miles away, and the area saw few visitors outside of hunting season. As he approached his dock, Marcus could see Sailor waiting at the end, tail no longer wagging but held stiff and alert. The dog's ears were pinned back, and as soon as Marcus tied off the boat, Sailor bounded forward, nose immediately drawn to the strange object. The collie circled it, sniffing intently, then backed away with a low whine that raised the hair on the back of Marcus's neck. "Easy, boy," Marcus murmured, though the dog's reaction unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Sailor was not a skittish animal. In all their years together, Marcus had seen the dog face down coyotes, stand firm during thunderstorms, and swim through icy water without hesitation. Whatever was in that box, Sailor wanted nothing to do with it. Marcus hauled the box onto the weathered planks of the dock, his muscles straining under its weight. Water dripped between the boards, and he could hear the lake lapping gently against the pilings below. He stood there for a moment, staring down at the box, weighing his options. Every instinct told him this was not something he should open alone, not something he should involve himself with at all. But the curiosity was too strong, and the isolation of his life meant there was no one to share the burden of decision with. He carried the box up the narrow path to his cabin, Sailor following at a distance, still whining softly. The cabin was small, just one room with a sleeping loft, a wood stove, and a few pieces of handmade furniture. It sat in a clearing barely large enough to be called a yard, surrounded by towering Douglas firs and hemlock. Marcus set the box on the porch table, an old wooden surface scarred by years of use. The morning light was stronger now, burning away the mist, and he could see the box more clearly. Rust streaked the corners where the paint had worn away. The latches looked old but functional, secured with simple mechanical locks rather than padlocks. Someone had wanted this box to be opened eventually, just not easily. Marcus fetched a crowbar from the shed, a small structure that leaned precariously against the cabin's north wall. He positioned the crowbar under the first latch, took a breath, and applied pressure. The metal groaned, resisting at first, then gave way with a sharp crack that echoed across the clearing. Sailor barked once, sharp and alarmed, then retreated to the steps. The second latch came easier. Marcus paused, his heart hammering in his chest, his hands slick with sweat despite the cold. He could still walk away. He could throw the box back in the lake, let it sink to the bottom, and pretend he'd never seen it. But even as the thought formed, he knew he wouldn't. Whatever was inside had been hidden for a reason, and that reason might matter. He took a breath and lifted the lid. The smell hit him first. Damp, chemical, and wrong. Not the smell of rot or decay, but something artificial, like preservatives mixed with plastic. Inside, the box was lined with thick plastic sheeting, carefully wrapped and sealed with waterproof tape. But it wasn't empty. Stacks of documents filled the space, some in plastic bags, others loose but protected by the inner lining. Photographs, maps, USB drives sealed in waterproof cases. And beneath it all, bundles of cash, wrapped tight in rubber bands, the bills damp but intact. Marcus's hands trembled as he pulled out one of the photo packets. He opened it carefully, his breath catching as he saw the images inside. They weren't vacation photos or family snapshots. They were surveillance shots. People entering buildings, their faces captured in harsh telephoto clarity. License plates, zoomed in and highlighted. Warehouses marked with red circles on printed maps. And faces, dozens of faces, some crossed out with thick red marker, others circled repeatedly. His stomach twisted. This wasn't someone's lost belongings. This was evidence. Evidence of something organized, something dangerous, something that people had gone to great lengths to hide. He dug deeper, his movements more frantic now. One folder contained detailed maps of the surrounding area, including Lake Mirren itself. Locations were marked with GPS coordinates, written in precise hand. Notes in the margins, pinned in tight, controlled handwriting, referenced dates, times, and what looked like shipment schedules. Another folder held financial records, spreadsheets detailing transactions in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, with columns labeled in codes Marcus didn't recognize. And at the very bottom, sealed in a heavy-duty plastic bag separate from everything else, was a handwritten note on a torn piece of yellow legal paper. Marcus unfolded it with shaking hands. The ink was smudged in places where water had seeped through, but most of it was still legible. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate. If you find this, they're closer than you think. Don't trust local police. Compromised. Contact FBI Field Office, Portland, Agent Sarah Chun. Evidence of trafficking operation, Lake Mirren area, 15+ victims. Lives at risk. Time sensitive. AC. Marcus staggered back from the table, the note fluttering from his fingers and landing on the weathered wood. Sailor barked once, sharp and alarmed, then began pacing in tight circles near the steps. The forest around the cabin seemed to press in closer, the shadows deeper than they had been moments before, the silence no longer peaceful but threatening. Trafficking. Operations. FBI. 15 victims. Someone had hidden this box deliberately, sealed it with care, and set it adrift, hoping it would be found by the right person. Or perhaps hoping it would sink to the bottom of the lake and disappear forever, an insurance policy that would only surface if everything else failed. Either way, Marcus now held something that people had likely killed to protect. And whoever AC was, they had known enough to be terrified. He looked out toward the lake, its surface calm and innocent in the morning light, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Somewhere out there, or perhaps much closer than he wanted to believe, people were watching. People who would want this box back. People who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who knew too much. Marcus's hands were still shaking as he reached for his phone, an old flip model that barely held a charge. The cabin had spotty service at best, just 1 or 2 bars if he was lucky, but he could usually get a signal if he walked to the edge of the clearing where the trees thinned out. He grabbed the note, several of the photographs, and one of the USB drives, stuffing them into a waterproof bag he used for his wallet when he was out on the water. Sailor stayed close, hackles raised, as Marcus stepped off the porch. His mind raced, trying to piece together what little he knew. The note had warned against local police. That meant whoever was behind this had connections, reach, maybe even people on the inside in Thornhill or the county sheriff's office. He would have to go higher, contact the FBI directly in Portland, just as the note instructed. But first, he had to make sure the box was secure. If someone came looking for it, and he had no doubt they would, he couldn't let them find it sitting on his porch. The evidence inside could be the difference between justice and more victims disappearing into whatever operation this note described. He turned back toward the cabin, scanning the tree line with new eyes. The forest was thick here, dense with underbrush, fallen logs, and years of accumulated deadfall. He could hide the box, bury it somewhere only he would know, somewhere the forest would swallow and keep secret. Then he would make the call to Portland, get federal agents involved, and hope they arrived before whoever had lost this box came looking. But even as he formed the plan, a sound reached his ears that made his blood freeze and his heart slam against his ribs. The distant rumble of an engine. A boat engine, coming from the northern end of the lake, from the same direction where he'd found the box floating just an hour earlier. Marcus's eyes snapped toward the water. Through the gaps in the trees, he could just make out a dark shape moving across the surface, heading in his direction with purpose. It wasn't a fishing boat. It was too large, too fast, cutting through the water with the kind of power that spoke of serious intent. And it was coming straight toward his shoreline. His heart slammed against his ribs. They were already here. Marcus didn't waste time thinking. He grabbed the box from the porch table, his muscles screaming under its weight, and ran toward the tree line behind his cabin. Sailor barked frantically, darting ahead and then circling back, his instincts telling him to flee, but his loyalty keeping him close to Marcus. The sound of the boat engine grew louder, closer. Marcus could hear it clearly now, the deep, throaty roar of something powerful cutting through the water at high speed. He crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at his jacket, his boots sinking into the soft earth beneath the carpet of pine needles. About 50 yards into the forest, he found what he was looking for, a massive fallen hemlock, its trunk hollowed out by decades of rot, covered in moss and ferns that had made it their home. He shoved the box deep into the hollow, then frantically pulled loose branches and handfuls of wet leaves over it, concealing it as best he could in the few seconds he had. It wasn't perfect, but unless someone knew exactly where to look, they wouldn't find it. He grabbed a piece of distinctive white quartz from the forest floor and placed it at the base of a nearby cedar, a marker only he would recognize. The boat engine cut suddenly to idle. They'd reached his dock. Marcus ran back toward the cabin, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He burst through the back door just as heavy footsteps hit the front porch. Sailor was already there, positioned between Marcus and the door, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door frame. Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly, to appear calm. He was just a fisherman, just a man who lived alone on a lake. He had done this for 20 years. He belonged here. Whoever was on the other side of that door was the intruder. He opened the door. 2 men stood on his porch. The first was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark waterproof jacket and jeans tucked into expensive hiking boots. His face was angular, clean-shaven, with cold gray eyes that assessed Marcus with unsettling intensity. The second man was shorter, stockier, with a thick beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Both had the look of men who were accustomed to getting what they wanted. "Morning," the tall one said, his voice pleasant but carrying an edge that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Sorry to bother you so early. I'm Derek Vaughn, and this is my associate, Cole. We're with a private recovery company working in the area." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Recovery company?" "That's right." Vaughn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for some property that was lost on the lake. Sealed container, about this big." He held his hands apart, indicating the exact size of the box Marcus had found. "Military-style case. Probably floating or washed up on shore. It's got sensitive equipment inside, research materials, that sort of thing. The company we're working for is offering a substantial reward for its return. $5,000, no questions asked." Marcus felt Sailor press against his leg, the dog's body tense and ready. He kept his voice casual, even a little confused. "Haven't seen anything like that. I was out fishing this morning, just got back about an hour ago. Didn't see anything unusual on the water." Cole, the bearded one, spoke for the first time. His voice was rougher, more direct. "You sure about that? We tracked some signals to this area. Our equipment's pretty accurate." "I'm sure," Marcus said firmly. "Like I said, I've been on the water since before dawn. If something like that was floating around here, I would have seen it." Vaughn's eyes narrowed slightly, and he took a small step forward. Marcus held his ground, aware of Sailor's growl growing louder. "Mind if we take a quick look around? Just to be thorough. Like I said, there's a substantial reward involved. Could be worth your while to help us out." "I do mind," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "This is private property. You've asked your question, and I've given you my answer. I haven't seen your box." The 2 men exchanged glances. The pleasant facade on Vaughn's face slipped slightly, revealing something colder underneath. "That's disappointing to hear. See, we've got GPS data that puts our property right in this area. Right around this cove, in fact. And you're the only person living on this part of the lake." "Then your GPS is wrong," Marcus said flatly. "Or whatever you're looking for already sank to the bottom." Lake's over 200 feet deep in places. If your box is down there, you'll need divers, not fishermen. Cole shifted his weight, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something under his jacket, the unmistakable outline of a shoulder holster. These weren't recovery specialists. They were enforcers, sent to retrieve the evidence by any means necessary. Vaughn must have seen Marcus notice, because his demeanor changed entirely. The false friendliness vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Here's the thing, Marcus, it is Marcus, right? I did my homework before we came out here. Marcus Webb, 53 years old, no family, no close friends, living alone on a lake where no one would hear you scream. That box contains property that doesn't belong to you. Property that people with a lot of resources want back very badly. So I'm going to ask you one more time, nicely, where is the box? Marcus's hand moved slowly to the small of his back, where he kept a old .45 tucked into his waistband whenever he went into town, a habit from his younger days that he'd never quite shaken. And I'm going to tell you one more time, get off my property. Now, the standoff stretched for 3 long seconds. Sailor's growl had become a continuous snarl, his body coiled like a spring. Vaughn's hand moved toward his jacket, and Marcus knew the situation was about to explode into violence. That's when they heard it, the distant sound of another boat engine, different from the first. Then another. Multiple vessels approaching from the southern end of the lake. Vaughn's head snapped toward the water, and Marcus saw something flash across his face. Uncertainty, then concern. Cole pulled out a radio, and a crackling voice came through. Abort. Multiple contacts inbound. Law enforcement signatures. We're blown. Get out now. Marcus's hand had found the grip of his .45, and he pulled it smoothly, leveling it at Vaughn's chest. Sounds like you gentlemen need to leave. Right now. For a moment, Vaughn looked like he might try anyway, his eyes calculating the odds. But the boat engines were getting louder, and Cole was already backing away, fear overriding whatever orders he'd been given. Vaughn's jaw clenched, and he pointed a finger at Marcus. This isn't over. You just made the worst mistake of your life. I'll take my chances, Marcus said. Now get off my dock before the FBI gets here, and I tell them you pulled a gun on me. The 2 men retreated quickly, jumping into their boat, a sleek black vessel with tinted windows and powerful engines. They roared away just as 3 official boats rounded the point, their hulls marked with FBI in large yellow letters. Marcus lowered his weapon and sagged against the door frame, his legs suddenly weak. Sailor pressed against him, whining softly now, sensing the danger had passed. The FBI boats pulled up to his dock, and a woman in a dark jacket and tactical vest was the first one off, her badge clearly visible on her belt. She was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and an air of authority that was unmistakable. Marcus Webb, she called out. I'm Special Agent Sarah Chun, FBI Portland Field Office. We need to talk about a phone call we received this morning. Something about evidence related to a trafficking operation. Marcus blinked in confusion. I haven't called anyone yet. I only found the box an hour ago. Chen's expression shifted to surprise, then understanding. You found another one? Mr. Webb, we've been investigating a trafficking network operating in this region for 6 months. 2 days ago, one of our confidential informants, a woman named Adrienne Cole, went missing after she told us she'd hidden evidence on Lake Mirren. She managed to get one message out this morning with GPS coordinates before her phone went dead. Those coordinates led us here. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. AC Adrienne Cole. She hadn't just hidden one box. She'd hidden multiple ones as insurance, scattering them across the lake. And she'd managed to alert the FBI before they'd silenced her completely. The box is hidden in the woods, Marcus said. I'll show you where. But there were 2 men here just now, armed, looking for it. They work for whoever's running this operation. Chen's jaw tightened, and she spoke quickly into her radio, ordering roadblocks set up on all routes leading away from the lake. Then she looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. You did the right thing, Mr. Webb. That box contains evidence that's going to bring down one of the largest trafficking operations in the Pacific Northwest. Witness testimony, financial records, names, locations, everything we needed to make arrests across 3 states. If those men had gotten it back, 15 victims would never have gotten justice. And Adrienne Cole's sacrifice would have been for nothing. Marcus led them into the forest, Sailor trotting beside him. When they reached the fallen hemlock, He pulled away the branches and revealed the sealed metal box. Chen's team carefully extracted it, photographing everything, preserving the chain of evidence. As they worked, Chen stood beside Marcus, watching her team. Adrian was brave, she said quietly. She worked inside their organization for months, gathering everything she could. When they figured out what she was doing, she knew she wouldn't make it out. So she sealed the evidence, divided it up, and set it adrift, hoping someone honest would find it. Hoping someone would care enough to do the right thing instead of looking the other way. Marcus thought about the note, about the desperation in those hurried words, about a woman who had known she was going to die but had fought to the very end to save others. "Did you find her?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Chen's expression was grim. "We found her body this morning, weighted down in the northern section of the lake. But because of what you did today, her death won't be meaningless. We've already started making arrests. By tonight, we'll have over 30 people in custody, and those 15 victims will be free." The sun was higher now, burning away the last of the morning mist. The lake sparkled innocently in the light, giving no hint of the darkness it had concealed. Marcus looked out over the water he'd called home for 20 years and realized it would never look quite the same again. Over the following weeks, the news broke across every major outlet. A massive trafficking network dismantled. Victims rescued. Arrests spanning 3 states. And at the center of it all, a sealed box floating on a remote lake, found by a fisherman who'd had every reason to look the other way but hadn't. Marcus gave his testimony, worked with prosecutors, and watched as the people who'd stood on his porch that morning were sentenced to decades in federal prison. Agent Chen told him that without his decision to protect the evidence, the entire case might have fallen apart. But what stayed with Marcus most was something Chun had said during one of their later conversations. She'd told him about Adrian Cole, about the life she'd lived, the courage she'd shown, and the 15 people who were alive because she'd refused to stay silent. "She couldn't have known you'd be the one to find it," Chen had said. But she believed that someone good still existed out there. Someone who would do the right thing when it mattered most. She bet everything on that belief. And she was right. Marcus returned to his cabin, to his boat, to his simple life on Lake Mirren. But he was changed. The isolation he'd sought for so long felt different now, not like an escape, but like a responsibility. He'd been in the right place at the right time, and he'd made a choice that had saved lives. Sometimes, on quiet mornings when the mist still clung to the water, Marcus would stand on his dock with Sailor beside him and think about Adrian Cole, about her courage, her sacrifice, and the sealed box she'd entrusted to the lake and to fate. And he understood now that peace wasn't found in turning away from the world's darkness. It was found in being willing to stand against it, even when you stood alone. The lake stretched before him, vast and deep, holding its secrets. But Marcus had learned that some secrets were meant to surface. Some truths demanded to be told. And sometimes, a simple fisherman with a good dog and a conscience was all it took to bring darkness into the light.